Okay, I had a question or two after class, and let me see, I don't know if everybody that asked it's here, but we'll answer it anyway. Or at least I'll respond to it. I don't know if it'll be an answer. Just a couple of slides from last week and week before last in reference to lying. We talked about God's attitude toward it, that He hates it and that it's contrary to His nature, and that He Himself cannot lie. That's who He is, and that's certainly His disposition, and He forbids lying. He doesn't allow His people, if they're going to be His people, if they're going to have His blessings, He will not allow us to lie. So our response, morally speaking, that is, if we're going to be right, and the simple definition of morality is being right in our relationship with God and our fellow man, we ought to hate lying the way He does, and we should recognize lying identifies us not with God, but with Satan, who is the father of lies, and we should recognize that lying separates us from God. And that gets my attention because I don't want to be separated from Him. In fact, in the Sermon on the Mount, you remember the Lord said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." And lying doesn't allow us to be pure in heart. It pollutes our heart. We want to make sure that we don't practice lying. And we should recognize any advantage that we might think lying would provide is described in Proverbs 21 and verse 6 as vaporous. It only lasts momentarily. It may get us through an embarrassing moment, we think. It may give us a momentary advantage, we think, over someone else, but it will not last. The questions, and we ended on that note last week. Someone had asked the difference between lying was defined in our discussion together and someone being in error. Lying being that deceptive approach where you're trying to deceive someone in your answer, in your manipulation. Whereas error, that is, if someone doesn't know better and they're practicing a certain thing because they don't know any better, is that considered lying? Well, anything that's not true is a lie. Now, we may certainly not be a participant in that. I think of an example probably that stands out to me most is the Apostle Paul. When he reflects back on his life, he believed with all of his heart that what he was doing was right with God. It wasn't right with God. He was persecuting Christians. He's putting to death of those who were right with God and doing what God wanted them to do. And he said he did that in all good conscience. But he was in error. And so the question was asked from that standpoint, is that a lie? Well, Paul was believing a lie. He didn't purposely deceive himself, nor did he purposely deceive other people, but it still was. He was operating without truth. It was an error. It was contrary to God's will. And I guess my basic response to that would be, it wouldn't be in the same definition of lying, but it still separates us from God. We know that if Paul had died in that condition, he would have died lost, so it doesn't really matter what we call it. It's still a separation from God if we don't do His will. So here's what it behooves us to do, is to make sure that we know God's will. The only way we're going to make sure that we don't deceive ourselves or anyone else is to know God and to know His will and purpose. I think an illustration of an attitude and disposition toward that is found in Acts chapter 17 and verse 11. When Paul had preached in Berea, it said that they were more noble than those in Thessalonica, in that they searched the Scriptures daily to see if those things were so. What if they'd not been so? And maybe we should ask, how would they know whether they were so? Okay, that's right. Paul had referred back to the Scriptures. He had preached his message as a fulfillment of God's promise to man, and both quoting from Old Testament prophets and making application that Christ is a fulfillment. He is that prophet that Moses was talking about. It, and all those elements that he would have shared in his message was a fulfillment of those things, and they went to those Scriptures to see if he used that context correctly. Much like you would have visualized the eunuch doing that in Acts chapter 8, when he was reading ahead of time those Scriptures and he didn't understand them. And when Philip asked him, "Understandest thou what thou readest?" he said, "How can I except some man show me?" And it said Philip began at the same Scripture and preached unto him Jesus. So these Old Testament Scriptures obviously pointed to Jesus, and these folks could go and, as was pointed out to us, and see whether those things were so. Brother Warren, you had your hand up.
Would you distinguish between that which is false and that which is a lie? Would you equate, in other words, can one be a subset of the other entirely equal? Or would you say whatever is false is also a lie?
Well, I think you'd have to ultimately say whatever is false is also a lie. Now again, the person who believed the lie might have had confidence in the person who told him the lie, and so they may be functioning in error, not purposely trying to be defiant to God or purposely repeating what they said to harm anybody else. It wouldn't be their purpose to deceive, but they would have been deceived. If it's false, then it's not true. If it's not true, what is it? Hmm. Okay.
There is no intent.
Okay.
I would not say I'm a liar.
Yep.
I would say that I'm wrong. I'm mistaken. So I think the person to be mistaken, they can say that which is not true, which means it's false. But it's not necessarily a lie. A lie involves motivation. It's not always very.
Yeah. And I think that's when the question was asked about error is a distinction, and that is the intention behind it. Lying would be purposefully to deceive. But for us to believe that falsehood, if it's false, then go ahead.
I was going to say, that kind of reminds me of what David Liscombe, a premillennialist, and studied through it
Yeah.
and found that to be false.
Mm-hmm.
So what would he say about that?
Yep. Yep. And I think that may be where we get. I certainly see where Brother Warren's coming from, and that it's either true or false, and we might be wrong in what we do. But take premillennialism for example. If you were to preach that, your purpose is to promote that. And if it's false, and you've led somebody to believe that, then in essence, you've led them to believe a lie, something that's not true. Either way, we're going to be separated from God. Okay, we've got a lawyer who's going to help us out here. Yes, sir. Okay.
Are you saying that anytime somebody says something in their respect, they're lying?
Go ahead.
You were saying earlier, someone had asked about the person's in error with their lie. I think if somebody put up a person's lie, like saying the mother says to the children, "Your daddy went to the
Yeah.
store." Then she found out he didn't, and she says, "Oh, I lied."
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And maybe that's the distinction we need to make. Is okay. I'm going to get too far away from the lawyer here, and he's going to call me back on the stand and say, "Answer my question, yes or no." here's the distinction I'm trying to make. No, I don't think it's the same thing to say, I'd purposely deceive you. That's obviously a lie. You know, I have, like Satan said, thou shalt not surely die. That's a lie. They're going to die. He purposely twisted, changed what God said. If I didn't have all the information, I think that's where you're saying, I don't have all the information and I misrepresented something simply because I didn't have all the information. What I gave you was false because I didn't give you all the information. I didn't know all the information. My purpose wasn't to deceive you. So that wasn't a lie, just I didn't tell factual information. But I'm saying when you boil it all down, it still ends up at the same place. It's either true or it's not true. Your purpose of telling it wasn't to deceive, so you didn't tell a lie. But how are you going to correct that untruth? What would you do about that? What if you did nothing about that? Okay, it'd still be an untruth, but I'm saying if it affected something, I mean if it's false, it's not true, then what should we do when we find out it's false?
You're being said with omission and information.
Say that again.
Omission and information.
Okay. All right.
I think what you got here is, it is a lie.
All right.
If you are not held accountable until you know the truth, and if you don't correct it, then you do are a liar and held accountable.
Okay, and that's the point, is what we do about it. And if you were to take Blaine's description there, and you found out it was false, and you said, okay, you know, what I shared with you is this. This is really the essence of the matter. You know, that wasn't a correct statement. My purpose wasn't to deceive you. Here's the correct statement. If you learned it was false, and you didn't do that, what would keep that from being a lie? Now all of a sudden you've got deception involved. You've got the truth now. What did Paul spend the rest of his life doing after he was mistaken? He didn't purposely persecute people in a deceptive way. He said with all good conscience, he thought he was doing the right thing. Was he doing the right thing? He wasn't. Okay, people said I need to stand still over here. He wasn't. What did he spend the rest of his life doing? Correcting the mistake, saying what I taught you is false. Even faced those people who gave him papers to go do what he was doing. Even faced those folks and said, here's what I said. When I was with you, here's what I said. But that isn't true. So it gets back to the motive. You know, sharing something that's false when you don't know it's false is not a lie in itself because you didn't intend to deceive. Once you learn that's a falsehood, you do nothing to correct it. Is that a lie or not? You know, don't want to get into semantics and lose our whole process of lying, but the question was asked, and I think it's a legitimate question. We can do things in error where we didn't know better. And that's not a lie. We didn't purposely try to deceive anybody. But what happens if we find out it's an error? Can we keep doing it? No. Beg pardon? Okay, there you go. Okay. Yep. That's right. Yep. Yeah. Now, I think that's it. And I think that's a distinction you have to make. Yep. Yep. Okay. Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. Okay. I think that's helpful, and that goes back to what Sister Body was saying. If somebody says, They told us something and they learned better and say, oh, I lied to you. Well, their purpose wasn't to lie to us, wasn't to deceive us. But it still would be helpful if they said, what I told you, I didn't have all the information. And here's the point. And again, it's a matter of semantics, I guess. But here's the point. We need to train ourselves not to be paranoid about everything and feel like we've got to, never make a mistake. But we ought to really take seriously what we say and how we say it and how that affects folks. And really just be a person who's always honest and truthful. When we learn that it's not, that let's correct that right away. Not say, well, I don't think it makes any difference. It ought to make a difference. And I think, Sister Body, in what you described for us, wouldn't be anything wrong with someone, and certainly ought to be what a person does, just say, I was kind of in a hurry the other day, and you asked me something, this is what I said, and when I thought about it, here's an accurate answer to that. And what I gave you the other day wasn't full information. We ought to go to that kind of effort in our communication with each other so that we don't get in those areas where it's vague or it can be used in a deceptive way, and somebody says, well, Jerry told me, and Jerry never came back and told any difference. Well, he told me this the other day, and if that was a falsehood, if what I said was false and I found out different, I need to address that. You had other comments. Looked like I had another hand or two up, and I ignored you till I got all the key is, yes, sir.
I was just going to make another quick statement.
Sure.
The fact that Matthew 7:17, you find John 8:31 and 32, you remain in my word, put in my disciples, and you shall know the truth. The truth will set you free. So if we see in this life, we eventually will find the truth. At the end of this life, somebody standing before God, I never found the truth. Well, what does that mean? If you seek, you can find. If I never find it, then it's life. And you can look at Matthew 18 and 19. I don't think it's a coincidence that back to back, you have the stories of Apollos. Apollos is someone who's mistaken. I don't think he's lying. I don't think he's deceiving people on purpose. But he is teaching something false about baptism. He knows only the baptism of John.
Right.
And it's not a coincidence that he is in Ephesus and goes to Corinth. Paul's in Corinth and he goes to Ephesus. And lo and behold, what in the very next chapter does Paul find? When he goes to Ephesus, people where Paul had been was Ephesus. And they only know the baptism of John. It doesn't say Paul is responsible. I think there's a likelihood that there's some connection there.
Right.
And they only know the baptism of John. They know it after the fact that the New Testament now churches exist in Acts 2. I think Paul was baptized back before that, the baptism of John. That's not only the first thought, I think it's the garden thought, my commentary. But my point is simply this. Paul is mistaken. He's wrong. What he's teaching is false. It's not a lie. But he does eventually learn the truth because he's a person who seeks the truth. And it's not a chance that he meets Paul and Priscilla and they invite him to their house. And they teach him because they prefer being invited to this from you. And then in Paul, you've got God in control of things, and I don't think it's a coincidence that Paul comes up there and finds those people in this Paul. So I take from that, if I understand something wrong, if I've got something false, I don't intend to just teach people. If God, the people that I misfall the path, I go on, I learn the truth, he'll make sure they learn the truth. If it's not from me, he'll make sure they learn the truth. It's like those people in Ephesus.
Yeah.
When Paul did not go back and all this wrong teaching, God will take care of everybody. We just need to teach people to know that we're mistaken on something. Eventually, God will help us to see the truth. We want to see it. We want to see it all.
That's a good distinction. I think that's fair enough. One thing I would caution, though, had Apollos been shown the way of the Lord more perfectly by Aquila and Priscilla, and he kept teaching John's baptism, it's still false, and now it's a lie because he knows it's false. and he's preaching it anyway. So maybe that's a distinction that'd be helpful to us, and I hope that addressed some of those concerns. Either way, I thank God through His providence does give us opportunities, but boy, we have some responsibilities, don't we? To be doing that seeking and to be studying and searching the way those did in Berea, because we really do want to know whether or not it's from God or not. And we can certainly, the only way we're going to know that is to search His Word. But good point, good discussion, and I'm glad we're conscious enough of it to want to make sure that we're getting it right. Yes, sir. All right, might as well.
We use the word lie two ways, noun and verb. And when we use it as a verb, I think we agree that you've got to intend to deceive if the untruth you're saying is actually a lie. But could it be reasonable to say that lies have been uttered, believed sincerely, repeated, but the content of what is said is a lie, even if the intent, the verb lie, was not to deceive. As if, for instance, we were to take a false religion. At some point along the way, there's been somebody with the intention to deceive, but yet somebody came along and they believed that lie, not understanding and know it's a lie, and they repeated it. What was repeated was a lie, but they didn't intend to deceive because they sincerely believed it. Like I say, distinguishing between the noun and the verb.
Yeah. And I think that's probably part of our discussion tonight is that distinction. But the key is this. The truth is the only thing that's going to save us. And so whether it's an intentional lie told or a false belief that we have, unintentionally presented to us, whatever it is, if it's not true, we're going to be separated from God. So the bottom line is we want to get it right, don't we? And that's why we have these kind of discussions to make sure that we're right with God. And if we're going to be morally right, it behooves us to search for truth in every aspect. In our business dealings, in our conversation with our families, in our interaction together as a spiritual family, with dealing with our fellow man, we need to always do our very best to make sure we've got the right information to share. And it's okay to tell folks. If they ask you questions you don't know, it's okay to say, I really don't know the answer to that. And that's a serious question. And so why don't we look for the answer together? Sometimes we are so quick to try to answer that we do share things that are not true, not fully researched, spiritually speaking. And so therefore it might deceive, without being our intention to deceive. It might be confusing to folks or misleading to folks. So we need to take those things seriously. Now, we don't want to go to the other extremes. Well, I don't ever tell a lie, so I'm just not going to ever bother with any of it. I'll just say, I don't know. That's certainly not the way to go either. Great discussion, and I'm glad you were able to hear from different vantage points. And does somebody else have something? Yes, ma'am. The midwives you're talking about in Exodus 1, did they lie? We were talking about that the other night. I don't remember who it was. Let me get there. And okay. You can go ahead and tell me how you feel about it, okay?
I think they had understanding,
Yeah.
with Hebrew women,
Yeah.
to make sure they had the verb to get there. They obviously did that. They had understanding, they knew what was going down, so they just made sure they weren't there.
Yeah.
All it says is their excuse to Pharaoh,
Yeah. Okay.
they might have just had that understanding.
Yep.
Or in this situation, you go ahead and have your baby. You can have a baby without official midwives.
Yep.
They might have other midwives. These two are men named. They can just say, you didn't know anything. We had an arrangement.
Yeah. Well, I think the key in that passage would be this is because of their fear of the Lord, of their consciousness of these being God's people, and whatever they did on that occasion, I think they were at the point where they would rather face Pharaoh than to face the God of the Israelites, and I think it fits into the category that we discussed the other night about Rahab. You can have opinions about, would the spies been caught if she hadn't hid them? Was it okay for her to lie? And God just records what happened. He doesn't manipulate the nuances by saying we're going to make this, all sound really good. And he just described it the way it is. And she obviously deceived. That's not. She's Rahab the harlot, so in our context of life, she has a lot of issues. But here's the key: is I don't think we can project on that it was her lie that saved the spies. God was going to give them that land. She was convinced of it. The Israelites were convinced of it. I don't know what God would or could have done under those conditions, but I don't just automatically assume that had Rahab not lied, those spies would have been caught and killed. I don't assume that. God has, always defeated if He can part the Red Sea and let them walk on dry land. He defeated their 185,000 Assyrians woke up dead. It wasn't because the Israelites did it. God can do a lot of things. So I don't think we need to project on that things that are not said. And the same is true to me when you look at the midwives. I think they're complimented. I think God compliments them through His Word, just recording that. And they had a greater fear for God than they did Pharaoh. And I think that's a compliment to them. But I don't assume from that, and I don't project onto that all the male children would have been killed had they not done that. But it's my confidence is in God, and I think in both cases these heathen folks had that image of God. So I don't think we need to have less of an image of God and say, had they not done that, then everybody would have been annihilated. I don't believe that. God's promise is going to come to pass no matter what. And it just so happened that these heathen people respected God enough to be a participant in making sure that was carried out. Rahab ends up even in the lineage of her descendants, ends up in the lineage of Christ. And so He certainly can use those things, but we just kind of get caught up sometime and what all does that mean? It just means that it happened. That's what it means. It happened and He recorded it and didn't justify or vilify. He just recorded it. Do you have something, Alice? Okay. All right. Sure.
On this, I think people are always trying to justify a lie. That's why they bring up Rahab. That's why they bring up other midwives.
Yeah.
But nobody rarely points out things like that. Rahab is risking her life for her life.
Sure. Sure.
They find out those spies are there. They really look through that house. And they find those spies. She is happy. The same thing's true with midwife. Now, most everybody else lies
Yeah.
because what's that in the middle of the letter? The word life. It's out. They're protecting themselves from some embarrassment. They're protecting themselves from somewhere. It's not the case with Rahab. It's not the case with midwife. I'm not sure midwife
No. Yep.
Now, I'll be honest with you. Say something that will make these controversial.
I would think you'd be honest with me. You go ahead.
I'm in Germany, and the Nazis knock on my door, and I have a family with a little child, a Jewish child, that I hid in my house. If I can't think of another way to do it, I will lie. And I would beg God's forgiveness, but I wouldn't be self-righteous and say, yes, sir, come right on in, Mr. Nazi officer. I actually haven't had hiding some Jews. They're in this trap door, we pull away this table, we pull back the rug. I wouldn't do that. I mean, if I could, I'd like to think that God would help me feel like a 14 movie. I told you last week, and I put up with something clever. It's not a lie, but it's clever.
Yeah.
You know? But I'm not going to sit there and hesitate. If you hesitate and him fall around, they know. The Nazis going to know the lie. They're going to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it came down to it on something like
Yeah.
that, because I wouldn't be trying to protect me.
Yep. Yep.
Be like Graham. I would still say it's a sin. I would rather do that and beg for God's forgiveness than I would self-righteously tell the truth. And I don't want to mislead anybody.
Yeah.
I'm hiding Jews. Come on in. I'll make this easy. I'll let you go in. You'll get them all. I can do it.
Yep. And here's, I think, the contrast. And I don't guess any of us would know for sure what we'd do until we were faced that. I would put that in the same category that you put the confidence that if a person was seeking the truth, they're going to find it. That if we're seeking to do right, we're going to have opportunity to do right. But it's those scenarios, and that's always the case. I've been in school long enough, and all of you have, that those are always the scenarios that we get. Is what would you do if? And those are tough spots to be in. Say, well, that's probably what I'd do. And then they say, okay, if it's all right to do it then, is it okay to do this? And so we just have to deal with what God describes. He hates lying. He describes what lying does in our relationship to Him and with each other. And so let's be folks who are going to tell the truth. We get in those kind of situations and the circumstance that presents itself, and we react in a way. God does forgive us if we repent of that, but we don't want that to be used, like people have used Rahab, as a justification to say, well, there are reasons where you could just justify lying. Those are the things we have to be careful with. And those are always scenarios, every continuing education ethics training I get, they don't give these really good scenarios where the answer is just real clear. It's always kind of murked up and say, okay, what would you do here? Say, well, I think I'd do this. Well, what about this? Well, I didn't really think about that. No, I can't do that because, okay, here's what I'll do. Well, what about this? If we are who we need to be, and that's really, and it's your class, and so I've got next week's prepared because I didn't deal with what I was going to deal with this week. What we'll do next week is, I think we'll take everything that we've talked about tonight and be able to put that into perspective to say, if we are who we need to be, we have all those ingredients that need to be there and that God has described as being the fruit of the Spirit. And we group those in the way that we recognize what it does for our relationship to God, what it does with our relationship with each other, and what it does with our relationship with ourselves. And that is how we feel about ourselves and how we see ourselves and our relationship with God and our fellow man. We're going to always do our very best to make the right decisions for the right reasons at the right time. Will we make mistakes? Sure we will, because we're not all knowing. And there'll be certain circumstances present themselves that we'll not have processed, or we're just so overwhelmed by that we'll make choices at the moment that we may look back on and say, was it the right choice? But it won't be because we're the wrong person. And it won't be because, as Brother Warren pointed out, it won't be because our purpose is to deceive. Our purpose is to be unlike God, but we'll just be reacting to a circumstance that's a little overwhelming for us at the time, and we don't see another way. And we'll address that. But if we pray ahead of time and we live right ahead of time, we're going to have less and less of those circumstances that we've described. There may be some that come along. We're going to have less and less of those because of how we're dealing every day with our relationship with God and with each other. And if that is uncomplicated, we try to always know what the truth is before we share it. When we find out what we shared wasn't true, we correct it. If that just becomes who we are, our yea is yea and our nay is nay, and that's who we are, then we're going to have less of these circumstances to deal with. So really good information, and it gives me, an opportunity to learn from you and from us to learn from each other so that we recognize we're on this journey together, aren't we? And it's not always easy, it's not always crystal clear in the circumstances, but what is clear is God is true and Satan is a liar. And so when we're trying to decide what it is we do, let's see if what we're deciding to do is because of what we want our relationship to God to be, or is there a selfish motive there? Is there something that we want and we want to kind of not know all the facts, because if I know all the facts, I may not be able to do that or have that. And we're going to take some of those situations that we had. We won't conjure up any more. Conjure up is not the right description. We won't identify any other specific moral dilemmas. We'll just say, okay, what is the moral foundation on which our thoughts, our actions, our lives ought to be built? What are those ingredients? What is that foundation? If we get that part right, we'll be able to handle things. Remind me next week to share something that Brother Don shared with me several weeks ago. We were talking about these matters, and we were discussing Joseph and his particular circumstance and some applications of truths that I think would be useful for us there. All right? Good point. Good discussion. You obviously have been thinking about it, and you obviously are doing really good things in your life, trying to do what's right, and that's helpful. I will encourage you to read back through Galatians chapter 5, because we'll kind of be there next week in our discussion. I won't even show you the other slides, so that way I can just delete these two, and it'll be like a brand new experience for you. I'll be a week ahead. I'm rarely a week ahead on anything, so thank you for your input tonight, and that's very helpful in our overall discussion. And if you have other things along those lines you want to bring up, we'll start there